You know what keeps me up at night? What happens when the rats abandon ship but first redraw the blueprint so their replacements inherit a rigged fucking vessel? The air in the capital smells like decay, not the romantic kind you find in autumn leaves, but the wet rot stench of a structure collapsing from the inside while the architects sprint for the exits. 50 congressional lawmakers have announced they won't seek re-election in 2026, and the timing reeks of something far more calculated than simple retirement fatigue. Here's the scene. 85-year-old Nancy Pelosi, after 4 decades of political maneuvering, is finally fucking off into the sunset. Mitch McConnell, that 83-year-old monument to obstruction, is packing his legislative playbook. Marjorie Taylor Greene, yes, that shit stain, is rage quitting after falling out with Donald Dumpstump himself. Meanwhile, behind this theatrical exodus, Republican state legislatures have spent the past 4 years redrawing congressional districts with surgical precision, creating electoral fortresses that will outlast these departing dipshits by decades. The price good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. Plato. But what happens when the good men, and let's be fucking generous with that designation, aren't indifferent but complicit? What happens when they carefully construct the machinery of minority rule, then abandon ship before the consequences fully metastasize? The gerrymandering clusterfuck. Electoral maps as instruments of erasure. Let me paint you a picture of how this shitshow works. Since the 2020 census, Republican-controlled state legislatures have redrawn congressional maps in states like Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio, with one crystal-clear objective: lock in white conservative power for the next decade regardless of demographic shifts, voter preferences, or that quaint little concept called representative democracy. The receipts. In Texas, where Latinos now comprise nearly 40% of the population, the 2021 redistricting created 0 new majority Latino districts despite the state gaining 2 congressional seats, both drawn to favor white Republicans. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis personally intervened to eliminate 2 black majority districts, reducing black representation despite Florida's growing African American population. North Carolina's maps were so egregiously gerrymandered that even conservative courts called them unconstitutional, twice, before Republicans finally rammed through a version that dilutes urban Democratic votes across rural Republican strongholds. Now look at that list of retiring lawmakers again. Notice something? Jody Arrington, Michael McCall, Troy Niels, all Texas Republicans representing newly gerrymandered districts. Don Bacon from Nebraska, where fresh maps have made his Omaha area district safer for Republicans. These fuckwits didn't just benefit from gerrymandering, they actively supported it, then decided to cash out once the work was done. The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt. The translation? These departing shitheads have constructed a system where their replacements inherit electoral maps specifically designed to insulate them from accountability to the very communities most harmed by their policies: LGBTQIA+ folks, Black and brown communities, immigrants, disabled people, anyone who exists outside the narrow bandwidth of white Christian heteronormativity. The human cost of political cowardice. Here's where this clusterfuck goes from bad to fucking catastrophic. Gerrymandered districts don't just affect election outcomes. They systematically erase entire communities from political representation. When you pack Democratic voters, disproportionately people of color and queer folks, into absurdly shaped districts, you create 2 nightmares simultaneously. First, you create safe Democratic districts where representatives face no competitive pressure, leading to complacency. Second, You create vast swaths of safe Republican territory where representatives face zero incentive to address the needs of marginalized constituents who can't vote them out even if they wanted to. The pattern reveals. Trans kids in gerrymandered red districts face representatives who campaign on eliminating their health care access, knowing those kids' families can't generate enough votes to matter. Black communities in states like Alabama and Louisiana have been carved up so thoroughly that their collective political power, which should translate to multiple congressional seats, gets diluted into effective irrelevance. Latino voters in Texas watch their population boom translate to zero additional representation because the maps treat their communities like political inconveniences to be scattered and neutralized. Translation: the Great Abandonment isn't just about 50 lawmakers retiring. It's about those lawmakers leaving behind an electoral infrastructure specifically engineered to ensure marginalized communities remain powerless even as they become demographic majorities. Here's where my stomach turns itself inside fucking out. Several of these retiring Democrats, including Pelosi, Nadler, and Schakowsky, have spent years wringing their hands about threats to democracy while doing fuck all to actually prevent the gerrymandering that enables minority rule. They fundraised off the threat. They issued press releases. They held hearings. And now they're leaving. Their legacy a system even more rigged than the one they inherited. The worst part tastes like bile mixed with bureaucratic cowardice, that specific flavor of nausea you get when you realize the people who claim to fight for you were mostly just running out the clock on their pensions. The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. Martin Luther King, Jr. The specific mathematics of erasure. That deserves an autopsy. Nancy Pelosi claims her retirement marks a new chapter for Democratic leadership. Mitch McConnell insists he's simply passing the torch. Already accomplished. Transition fucking completed. Except, and I cannot stress this clusterfuck enough, both of these geriatric political fossils are leaving behind a congressional landscape where the districts themselves have been weaponized against the communities they claim to serve. The data that makes this personal. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, partisan gerrymandering in 2021 to 2022 gave Republicans a structural advantage of 16 to 17 seats in the House before a single vote was cast. That's not a small edge. That's the difference between functioning legislative power and permanent gridlock. For LGBTQIA+ communities watching state after state ban gender-affirming care, this means federal legislative relief is mathematically impossible, even if a majority of Americans support protections. For Black communities watching voting rights erode, it means the Voting Rights Act can't be restored, even though polling shows overwhelming support. For immigrant families facing deportation raids, it means comprehensive immigration reform remains a fantasy, regardless of demographic reality. This isn't political hardball. This is structural violence that requires either mathematical illiteracy or deliberate cruelty to defend. These retiring lawmakers, Democrat and Republican alike, participated in a system that treats democracy as a game to be manipulated rather than a trust to be honored. In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell. The truth? These 50 dumbasses aren't retiring because they're tired. They're bailing because they know what's coming. A gerrymandered hellscape where elections are theater, where marginalized communities can vote themselves blue in the face and still watch their priorities ignored, where the gap between the electorate and the elected becomes an unbridgeable chasm of cynicism and despair. What we've chosen, the comfortable complicity of exiting stage left. The synthesis is fuck all clear. We have a political class that spent decades building an electoral system designed to insulate power from accountability, and now they're departing en masse, leaving marginalized communities to navigate the rigged maze they constructed. Not strategic retirement timing, not natural political turnover. The calculated abandonment of communities under siege by representatives who know the gerrymandered districts they're leaving behind will elect successors even less responsive to those communities' needs. The projection and hypocrisy here would be fucking comical if it wasn't so lethal. These same shitstains who claim to fear for American democracy are the ones who allowed state legislatures to carve up communities of color with surgical precision, sat through Supreme Court decisions gutting the Voting Rights Act, and offered nothing but performative outrage, watched gerrymandering cases wind through courts for years while doing zero legislative work to prevent the practice. Now depart with pension packages and book deals, while trans kids in Tennessee face state-sanctioned erasure that their gerrymandered representatives actively celebrate. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Jean-Paul Sartre. What does it say that 50 lawmakers chose this particular moment to exit? That Dick Durbin, the current minority whip, is leaving just as Senate Democrats face their hardest electoral math in a generation? That younger Democrats like Jared Golden, who actually might survive the coming bloodbath, have decided it's not worth staying to fight? That Marjorie Taylor Greene, perhaps the most brazenly fascist voice in Congress, is piecing out because even Donald Munch's shit-shoot isn't extreme enough for her taste? The stain will leave, gerrymandered silence as violence. The air in those gerrymandered districts still smells like decay, that wet rot stench of democratic institutions hollowed out from within. Tomorrow, Nancy Pelosi will write her memoirs, Mitch McConnell will lecture about institutional integrity, and the same goddamn Democratic establishment will fundraise off the threat of Republican extremism while doing jack shit to address the structural mechanisms that enable that extremism. Tomorrow, queer kids in Alabama will wake up to representatives who literally campaign on erasing them, knowing those kids' families have been scattered across districts specifically designed to neutralize their votes. Tomorrow, Black communities in gerrymandered states will watch their population growth translate to zero additional power, while white conservative minorities lock in another decade of control. But that's not how it has to be. That's just how it is when political leadership treats democracy as a career path rather than a sacred trust. When retirement timing matters more than the communities left behind. When 50 lawmakers can look at the gerrymandered hellscape they helped create and decide, it's someone else's problem now. The question isn't whether gerrymandering is undemocratic. Obviously, it's a fucking authoritarian tool dressed up in legislative procedure. The question is, how long marginalized communities are expected to participate in a rigged system, while the people who rigged it cash out and leave? What kind of faith we're supposed to maintain when the maps themselves are instruments of erasure, and whether anyone in power gives enough of a shit to dismantle the machinery before it grinds what's left of representative democracy into dust. The smartest free crypto event. You'll join this year curious about crypto but still feeling stuck scrolling endless threads? People who get in early aren't just lucky. They understand the why, when, and how of crypto. Join our free 3-day virtual summit and meet the crypto experts who can help you build out your portfolio. You'll walk away with smart, actionable insights from analysts, developers, and seasoned crypto investors who've created fortunes using smart strategies and deep research. No hype, no FOMO. Just the clear steps you need to move from intrigued to informed about crypto. Secure your free pass now